Welcome to Sleepy Stories, a place where history meets rest. Here we share gentle, soothing tales about the lives of remarkable historical figures. From inventors and explorers to artists and leaders, each story is told slowly, softly, and with a calming rhythm, designed to ease your mind and guide you into sleep. Whether you want to unwind after a busy day, relax before bed, or simply enjoy peaceful storytelling, Sleepy Stories will be your companion for a restful night. So, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let history help you drift into dreams. Tonight we visit the life of Leonardo da Vinci, one of the greatest minds of the Renaissance. Born in 1452 in Vinci, Italy, Leonardo's journey was a flowing river of art, invention, and quiet observation of the world. This calming sleep story carries you through his early childhood among the hills of Tuscany, his apprenticeship in Florence, his masterful works of art, and his lifelong curiosity about science, nature, and the mysteries of life. From sketching inventions by candlelight to painting masterpieces like the Mona Lisa, Leonardo lived with a spirit of endless discovery. This story is told with a meditative rhythm, blending historical facts with tranquil imagery, designed to soothe the mind and slow the body into rest. You will wander with Leonardo through his workshops, gardens, and libraries, following his quiet reflections on art, science, and the beauty of nature. Perfect for those who love history, creativity, or simply a peaceful bedtime atmosphere, this story of Leonardo da Vinci is a journey into the heart of curiosity and calm. Let the soft storytelling guide you into sleep, where dreams may flow as gently as Leonardo's thoughts upon the page. In the spring of 1452, beneath the gentle skies of Tuscany, Leonardo da Vinci was born. The village of Vinci lay quietly among olive groves and rolling hills, the air carrying the fragrance of earth, flowers, and the hum of bees. Leonardo entered the world on the 15th of April, the son of Ser Piero da Vinci, a respected notary, and Caterina, a woman of the village. His beginning was simple, yet it unfolded within the embrace of landscapes that would shape his lifelong wonder. As a child, Leonardo grew in a world where the rhythm of nature guided each day. The sun rose slowly over fields and vineyards, casting gold across the hills, while streams trickled through valleys, murmuring their patient song. The countryside became his first teacher, offering lessons in quiet observation. He wandered along paths shaded by cypress and oak, his eyes tracing the movements of insects, the flight of birds, the patterns of leaves in the wind. From the earliest years, he showed a curiosity that flowed as endlessly as the Arno River winding through the land. Every stone, every ripple, every creature invited his attention. While other children played, Leonardo would pause to study the curve of a feather, the structure of a flower, or the way shadows lengthened across the ground at dusk. His world was filled not only with sights, but with questions, quiet mysteries waiting to be gently unraveled. Life in Vinci was simple, slow, and steady. Villagers worked the fields, tended to vines, and cared for animals. The bells of small churches marked the hours, echoing softly through the hills. Leonardo grew among this rhythm, his senses attuned to every sound, color, and movement. He absorbed the patience of farming, the endurance of stone walls weathered by time, and the calm repetition of days that mirrored the steady flow of the seasons. Though his family was not noble, his father ensured that Leonardo received guidance and opportunity. The young boy learned to read, write, and calculate, though the strict lessons of books never held his attention as firmly as the living world around him. He preferred to draw, to sketch with charcoal on scraps of paper, capturing the curve of a leaf, the outline of a bird, or the flowing line of a stream. Even then, his hands and eyes worked in harmony, guided by quiet curiosity. Evenings in Vinci carried a soft stillness. Families gathered in their homes, fires glowing gently, bread and oil shared at wooden tables. Outside, the night settled over the hills, stars filling the sky with calm brilliance. Leonardo often looked upward, watching the heavens with wonder, tracing the constellations and pondering the mysteries above. The same sky that watched over shepherds and farmers would later inspire his studies of astronomy and flight. The natural world, patient and enduring, became Leonardo's cradle. He learned to listen not only with ears, but with eyes, noticing the way a breeze bent grass, the way water shaped stone, the way creatures adapted to their surroundings. He absorbed the lesson that all things were connected, each part of nature flowing into another, forming a harmony that could be seen by those willing to observe quietly. His childhood days flowed gently, marked by slow discovery rather than haste. Each walk through the countryside was a meditation, each sketch a reflection of his attention. He did not know then how far his life would carry him, nor how his curiosity would shape the world, but already the seeds of observation had been planted. And so, Leonardo's earliest years passed beneath the Tuscan sun, among fields and streams, guided by the simple rhythms of nature. The village of Vinci, with its hills, churches, and farms, nurtured his curiosity. The world whispered to him in the rustle of leaves, the murmur of rivers, the quiet hum of bees, teaching him the patience and wonder that would define his life. As the night deepened over Tuscany, Leonardo would drift into sleep, his mind filled with images of feathers, stars, and flowing rivers. The hills held him, the earth cradled him, and the quiet pulse of nature guided his dreams. As Leonardo moved from the earliest years of childhood into the quiet unfolding of boyhood, his curiosity grew with him. It was not a fleeting curiosity, like a spark that fades, but a steady flame, glowing softly, warming his thoughts. He awoke each day in Vinci surrounded by fields, hills, and streams, and each morning seemed to whisper new mysteries into his ears. The village was small, its rhythm unhurried, yet for Leonardo, it was endless in its offerings. Every path held a new discovery. Every stone, insect, or flower seemed to hold a secret. While others walked quickly to their work, Leonardo lingered, pausing to study, to notice, to imagine. His world was alive with questions. He would follow the flight of birds, his eyes tracing the sweep of their wings, the way they tilted in the air, the way they rose and fell as though carried by invisible hands. He longed to know how it was done, how creatures of feather and bone could master the heavens. Sometimes he would sketch them, sometimes he would simply stand in silence, his mind floating with them across the sky. The Arno River, winding quietly through Tuscany, became another teacher. Leonardo would kneel beside its banks, watching how the water curved around stones, how ripples spread outward from a single drop, how currents carried leaves gently forward. He saw that water was alive, changing, shaping, flowing. To others, it was only a river. To Leonardo, it was a lesson in motion, in patience, in the hidden laws that guided the world. In the fields, he studied plants with the same devotion. He noticed the way stems bent toward the sun, the symmetry of petals, the quiet order of veins running through a leaf. With charcoal or ink, he captured their forms, not only to reproduce them, but to understand them. Even in youth, Leonardo's sketches carried a careful eye, each line an attempt to mirror nature's design. The villagers sometimes thought him distracted, lost in his own thoughts. But Leonardo was not lost. He was listening deeply to the world around him. Where others saw only a bird, he saw flight. Where others saw water, he saw movement. Where others saw a flower, he saw the order of life itself. His father, Ser Piero, encouraged him when he could, though he may not have fully understood the depth of the boy's observations. Leonardo's education was not the strict schooling of Latin scholars. He did not master languages or classical texts in these years. Instead, his education flowed directly from the earth, the sky, and the rivers. Nature was his tutor, patient and unhurried, offering endless lessons to one who cared to look. Evenings were quiet in Vinci. Fires glowed softly inside stone houses. The scent of bread and oil filled the air, and families gathered at tables. Leonardo, after his meal, often wandered outside again, gazing upward at the night sky. The stars drew him as strongly as the birds and rivers. He traced constellations, wondering what lay beyond them, imagining other worlds, other mysteries hidden in the heavens. The same sky that had inspired shepherds and dreamers for centuries now stirred thoughts in the boy who would one day imagine machines that reached for flight. Slowly, his notebooks began to take shape. They were simple at first, small sketches, fragments of thought, brief reflections. But each page was a seed, and each seed held within it the possibility of vast discovery. The act of writing, of drawing, of capturing what he saw and wondered, became part of his rhythm. His hand and his mind moved together, quietly, patiently, guided by endless curiosity. His learning was never hurried. He did not seek quick answers, for he understood, perhaps without realizing, that the mysteries of the world were not to be rushed. They were to be studied, pondered, and returned to again and again. Curiosity was not a chase, but a companionship, a presence that walked beside him each day. The countryside of Vinci seemed to understand him. The fields welcomed his steps. The river shared its secrets. The sky offered its stars. He was never truly alone, for the world itself seemed to speak to him in its quiet, patient language. And so, in these years of awakening, Leonardo grew not only in body, but in thought. His curiosity stretched outward in every direction, toward birds and rivers, toward plants and stars, toward the hidden order that lay beneath all things. Each day was a lesson, each night a rest that carried him gently toward dreams filled with motion, light, and possibility. He drifted to sleep with questions on his mind, not questions of worry, but of wonder. What guides the flight of birds? What shapes the ripples of water? What holds the stars in their places? The night would cradle him, the hills would watch over him, and curiosity would follow him into dreams. As Leonardo grew into youth, his father, Ser Piero, recognized that the boy's gift was not ordinary. The sketches that filled his pages, the patient studies of birds, water, and plants, were not the idle drawings of a child, but the beginnings of mastery. The boy's hand was steady, his eye keen, his mind alive with observation. It was clear that the countryside of Vinci had taught him well, but now it was time for him to learn in a new way. And so, in his early teens, Leonardo was taken from the quiet hills of Vinci to the vibrant heart of Florence. The city, surrounded by walls and crowned with domes and towers, was alive with the hum of the Renaissance. Markets bustled, bells rang from churches, artisans worked in their shops, and the air was rich with the scent of bread, stone dust, and paint. For a boy who had grown up among fields and rivers, Florence was another world entirely. Its streets were narrow and full of voices, echoing with merchants calling out their wares, the clatter of carts, and the steady rhythm of footsteps. Bridges arched gracefully over the Arno River, connecting neighborhoods alive with life. The great dome of Santa Maria del Fiore rose above the city, visible from nearly every street, a reminder of what human hands and minds could achieve. For Leonardo, every corner of Florence offered a new sight to study, a new detail to commit to memory. His father arranged for him to enter the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the most respected artists and craftsmen of the city. Verrocchio's bottega was more than a workshop. It was a world unto itself, filled with apprentices and assistants, each busy with tasks. The air carried the smell of linseed oil, fresh plaster, and the metallic tang of bronze. Light streamed through tall windows, illuminating shelves stacked with brushes, pigments, chisels, and tools of every kind. Here, Leonardo joined other young apprentices, learning not only to paint, but to master the many skills that art required. His first tasks were humble. He ground pigments from minerals, carefully crushing them into powder before mixing them with oil or egg yolk to make paint. He swept floors, prepared wooden panels, and stretched canvases. He learned how to boil glue from animal hides, how to polish marble until it gleamed, how to hammer gold leaf so thin it fluttered like breath. Every step was part of a greater lesson. Verrocchio believed that an artist should understand many crafts, for all knowledge was connected. Apprentices were expected to draw, to sculpt, to design, to build. The workshop echoed with the sound of chisels on stone, hammers on metal, brushes on wood. For Leonardo, this was a world of infinite possibility. Each day was filled with new textures, new colors, new forms. Slowly, he began to contribute more. His sketches revealed an extraordinary eye for detail, and soon he was trusted to paint small parts of larger works. At first, he filled in backgrounds: rocks, rivers, skies, trees. His hands gave them a subtle depth, a sense of air and space. Then he was asked to paint figures, and here his gift shone even more brightly. One story, often told, speaks of the baptism of Christ, a painting created in Verrocchio's workshop. Leonardo, still an apprentice, was asked to paint one of the angels. His touch was so delicate, his brush so alive, that the angel seemed to breathe on the panel. The hair curled softly, the eyes glowed with quiet light, the lips curved with grace. When Verrocchio compared it to his own work, he is said to have realized that his pupil had surpassed him. Whether entirely true or not, the tale captures the truth of Leonardo's gift. His art carried a living spirit that few could equal. Life in Florence moved with a different rhythm than Vinci. The city was crowded, alive with motion, but Leonardo carried the same patience and curiosity that had guided him in the countryside. He studied the faces of people in markets, the furrowed brows of merchants, the laughter of children, the quiet focus of workers at their trades. He sketched horses pulling carts, noting the tension of their muscles, the way their hooves struck the stones. He watched drapery flowing in the breeze, arches rising above streets, water glistening as it flowed beneath bridges. His notebooks began to fill even more rapidly. He copied faces, studied anatomy, experimented with perspective. He drew contraptions, pulleys, levers, wheels, fascinated by how machines could multiply force. Geometry held his attention too, as he measured proportions and traced circles, searching for harmony in numbers as well as in lines. Florence gave him more than materials. It gave him ideas, and it gave him a stage upon which to practice them. Among the apprentices, Leonardo stood apart. He was quiet, thoughtful, often absorbed in his own work. While others may have sought quick progress, Leonardo lingered, perfecting details, letting his hand move slowly until every line matched his vision. His patience, though it sometimes slowed him, gave his work a depth that few others achieved. And though he was devoted to his tasks, his mind still wandered beyond them. At night, when Florence settled into silence, Leonardo often returned to his thoughts. He remembered the hills of Vinci, the birds that circled above fields, the rivers that whispered to him. Now he combined those memories with the craft of painting, the tools of sculpture, the discipline of geometry. He saw how everything connected, how art and science, nature and craft flowed together into a single river of knowledge. In these years, Leonardo was still young, still learning. He was not yet the master whose name would echo across centuries, but already the light of his mind was visible. Already he was shaping visions that would one day change the way the world saw itself. Each evening, as the bells of Florence tolled and the workshop dimmed, Leonardo would lay down his tools. He would walk through quiet streets, past churches and arches, beneath the dome glowing in moonlight. The city, alive with ideas and beauty, seemed to cradle him as gently as the hills of Vinci once had. And when he closed his eyes at last, he dreamed not only of birds and rivers, but of angels, of machines, of works yet unpainted. In his dreams, the countryside and the city blended together, guiding him forward into the life that awaited him. Leonardo's years in Verrocchio's workshop shaped him, refining his hand and opening his mind to the endless possibilities of art and craft. Yet, as time passed, the boy from Vinci became a man, and with that growth came the quiet stirrings of independence. His skills had matured, his brush carried a confidence that few could ignore, and soon he began to take his first steps into the world as an artist in his own right. Florence in the late 1460s and early 1470s was alive with beauty and competition. Artists filled the city with frescoes, altarpieces, and sculptures. Wealthy patrons, whether noble families or members of the church, sought to adorn their chapels, palaces, and halls with works that would endure. For young painters, the path forward was clear. One must earn commissions, prove one's worth, and let the art speak for itself. Leonardo, though still in his 20s, already carried with him the reputation of talent. His early works began to appear, signed not as Verrocchio's apprentice, but as Leonardo da Vinci, painter. The boy, who had once sketched birds in the fields, now painted figures of grace and depth, their faces alive with thought, their forms softened by his subtle use of light and shadow. One of his earliest known works, the Annunciation, reflected this awakening voice. In the painting, the angel Gabriel kneels before the Virgin Mary, wings spread, robes flowing with delicate folds. Mary, calm and serene, listens with quiet grace. The landscape in the background stretches endlessly, fading into a soft horizon, painted with a tenderness that revealed Leonardo's deep observation of nature. Trees, water, and distant mountains carried a dreamlike calm, merging the sacred with the earthly. The details spoke of his patient eye. The feathers of the angel's wings seemed studied from birds in flight, each line carefully rendered. The folds of fabric echoed the drapery he had once sketched in Florence's streets. The plants in the foreground, painted with careful attention, revealed his love for the natural world. Even here, in a religious painting, Leonardo's curiosity about life's smallest details shone through. Florence responded with admiration. Patrons began to take notice, recognizing that this young artist carried something rare. His figures were not stiff or distant. They breathed. His landscapes did not serve merely as decoration, they felt alive. In Leonardo's hands, paint became more than color on wood. It became a mirror of life itself. Other works soon followed. The Adoration of the Magi, though left unfinished, showed his growing ambition. The composition swirled with movement, figures, horses, architecture, all alive with energy and mystery. Even in its incomplete state, the painting carried a sense of depth and complexity that few others had attempted. The unfinished brushstrokes seemed almost deliberate, as if to remind viewers that Leonardo's vision reached further than the limits of time and commission. Yet, Leonardo was not only an artist. His notebooks, already filling with sketches, carried ideas beyond painting. He studied anatomy, dissecting animals, sketching muscles and bones to understand the hidden structures beneath the skin. He observed how light touched surfaces, how shadows curved across faces, how perspective guided the eye. For him, art was never separate from science. Both were ways of understanding truth. In these years, his reputation grew, but so too did his restlessness. He accepted commissions, worked on panels and frescoes, yet often left them unfinished, drawn away by new ideas, new studies, new questions. Some patrons grew impatient, for they wished only for paintings completed. But Leonardo could not silence the pull of curiosity. Each work was a door, and behind it lay new mysteries calling him forward. Still, his talent could not be denied. Even when incomplete, his works inspired awe. The softness of his brush, the depth of his gaze, the harmony of his compositions, all spoke of an artist unlike any other. Florence, a city filled with masters, began to see in him something singular. Life around him carried on with its usual rhythm. The Medici family held influence. Scholars debated in halls. Merchants filled the markets. But Leonardo's days followed their own path. In the morning, he might mix pigments or draw studies of hands. At midday, he might walk through Florence's streets, sketching architecture or observing faces. At night, by the glow of a candle, he might fill his notebooks with visions of machines, bridges, or flying devices. Each day blended art and invention, observation and imagination into a single flow. And when the city grew quiet, When the bells tolled and the markets closed, Leonardo returned to his solitude. He thought of the works he had begun, the ideas he had not yet explored, the mysteries still unanswered. His life was no longer that of a boy wandering fields, nor solely that of an apprentice following instruction. He was now an artist, independent, shaping his own path. Yet even in independence, he remained the same at heart, curious, patient, drawn not to quick fame, but to the slow unfolding of truth. His early works were steps on a long journey, each one a reflection of both his mastery and his restlessness. And so Leonardo's days as a young artist unfolded, filled with commissions, studies and dreams. Each evening, as the lamps dimmed and Florence settled into sleep, he laid down his tools. His mind, still glowing with images of angels, landscapes, and machines, drifted into rest. In his dreams, unfinished paintings found completion, inventions took flight, and the mysteries of the world whispered gently, waiting for him to awaken once more. As Leonardo entered the next stage of his life, it became ever clearer that he was more than a painter. Though his art was admired, what stirred within him reached beyond panels and pigments. He was a seeker, one who wished not only to depict the world, but to understand it. For Leonardo, every leaf, every ripple of water, every joint of bone, and every turn of a gear carried within it a secret worth uncovering. His notebooks, small and bound in leather, became companions to his restless mind. By candlelight, in the quiet hours when others slept, he filled page after page with sketches and words. He wrote in a curious mirrored script from right to left, so that his notes could be read only with a mirror. Perhaps it was to keep his secrets from casual eyes, or perhaps it simply suited the rhythm of his hand. Whatever the reason, it added an air of mystery to his writings, as if they were meant for some future time, some future reader. On these pages, art and science intertwined. Drawings of angels and horses appeared beside diagrams of gears and pulleys. Studies of drapery shared space with sketches of plants, roots, and flowers. An elegant human hand, shaded with delicacy, might sit across from a design for a bridge or a flying machine. To Leonardo, there was no division between these pursuits. All knowledge was one, all truth connected, and the same patience that guided his brush guided his pen. Anatomy fascinated him most deeply. He sought to uncover the hidden architecture of the body, believing that to paint life truly, one must first understand its foundations. With boldness and care, he studied animals, and later, human remains. He observed muscles, ligaments, bones, the way tendons stretched and contracted, the manner in which blood vessels spread like rivers through the body. His sketches revealed a precision unseen in his time. He did not merely draw, he measured, calculated, and explained. He saw the body not as a single form, but as a system, a machine made by nature. The heart, he noted, was not merely a symbol of love, but a pump, pushing blood through chambers with steady rhythm. The lungs, expanding and contracting, drew air into the body as bellows feed a flame. Hands, with their bones and tendons, were marvels of design, each movement a harmony of parts. His drawings of the human embryo, curled within the womb, carried both scientific curiosity and quiet reverence. But Leonardo's interest did not stop with flesh and bone. He studied water, the element that had fascinated him since childhood. He sketched waves and whirlpools, streams and rivers, noting the way currents moved, the way droplets clung together, the way flow shaped the land. He saw patterns in the ripples of ponds, comparing them to the swirls of hair, to the movements of air, to the curves of shells. For him, water was not only vital to life, but a key to understanding movement itself. Light, too, captured his mind. He observed how it fell upon objects, how shadows curved and softened, how reflections glimmered in the eyes of living beings. He filled pages with studies of optics, drawing diagrams of rays passing through glass or bouncing off mirrors. His search for knowledge was endless. At times, he would list questions to himself, filling lines with queries. Why is the sky blue? How do birds stay aloft? Why do drops of water form spheres? Each question was a doorway, each page an exploration. His notebooks also carried visions of machines. Drawings of gears, levers, and pulleys filled the margins. He imagined devices for lifting weights, for building bridges, for diverting rivers. He sketched armored vehicles shaped like turtles, covered in plates of metal. He drew cannons, catapults, and fortifications, blending imagination with the needs of his time. Yet, for every design of war, there were others devoted to peace. Machines for irrigation, tools for construction, contraptions to ease labor. Most famously, Leonardo dreamed of flight. Birds, which had enchanted him since his youth in Vinci, remained his constant teachers. He sketched their wings, measured their spans, studied the way they beat against the air. He designed flying machines with vast wings of wood and cloth, mechanisms that mimicked the movements of feathers. He imagined men soaring like hawks, lifted by the power of invention. Though his machines would never take flight in his lifetime, his drawings carried the hope of centuries yet to come. What made Leonardo's science remarkable was not only its breadth, but its spirit. He did not simply record what he saw. He sought to understand why. He believed that truth could be found through patient observation, that nature revealed her secrets to those who watched with care. For him, knowledge was not an abstraction, but a living experience, as alive as the plants in a garden, as flowing as water in a stream. And still, he was gentle in his seeking. He did not rush, nor did he claim final answers. His notes are filled with beginnings, with experiments paused, with ideas left open. To him, curiosity was endless, and discovery was a path, not a destination. In the quiet of night, when Florence rested and the streets grew still, Leonardo's candle burned. He bent over his pages, sketching, measuring, wondering. His hand moved slowly, his mind faster still, weaving together threads of art, science, and imagination. Outside, the city dreamed. Inside, Leonardo dreamed too, of bodies understood, of rivers explained, of machines yet to be built, of skies yet to be conquered. And when sleep finally overtook him, his notebooks lay beside him, filled with questions unfinished. The ink dried, the candle dimmed, but the visions within him remained, waiting for dawn. By the early 1480s, Leonardo's path was shifting once again. Florence, with its bustling streets and crowded workshops, had given him much, but his heart and mind reached further than the commissions he found there. Opportunity soon called him northward, to the city of Milan, where the court of Ludovico Sforza awaited. Milan was different from Florence, where Florence lived in the brilliance of merchants and the subtle influence of the Medici. Milan was shaped by its dukes, its military strength, and its vast courtly life. Its streets were broad, its castle imposing, its atmosphere charged with both power and ambition. For a man like Leonardo, artist, engineer, dreamer, Milan offered a stage far greater than any he had yet known. Leonardo did not present himself merely as a painter. In a letter to the Duke, he described himself as an engineer, capable of designing bridges, fortifications, weapons, machines of war, and devices of peace. He promised not only works of art, but inventions to strengthen the city and entertain the court. To Ludovico Sforza, he was not simply an artist. He was a man of many talents, a mind that could serve both beauty and utility. At court, Leonardo's days were filled with variety. He painted portraits for the nobility, designed costumes and stage sets for courtly pageants, and played the lute, filling halls with music. He drafted plans for canals, studied the architecture of churches, and devised ambitious designs for machines that might one day change the world. Yet, through all of this, he remained the same quiet observer, watching the city, sketching its life, filling his notebooks with both practical and impossible visions. One of his great projects in Milan was a monument unlike any other, the colossal equestrian statue of Francesco Sforza, Ludovico's father. Leonardo envisioned a horse of monumental scale, cast in bronze, rearing in glory. He studied horses with patience, sketching their forms, measuring their muscles, capturing the power of their movements. He built clay models, refining them until the beast seemed ready to leap into life. The plans grew so ambitious that many doubted they could be realized. Though war would later prevent the casting of the bronze, the dream itself revealed the scale of Leonardo's imagination. But it was within the walls of a quiet convent at Santa Maria delle Grazie that Leonardo created the work that would define his time in Milan, the painting known as the Last Supper. The commission was for the dining hall of the Dominican friars. Upon one long wall, Leonardo was asked to paint the moment when Christ, seated among his disciples, revealed that one of them would betray him. Many had painted this scene before, but Leonardo's vision was unlike any other. He did not place the figures as rigid, separate forms, but drew them together in a single, flowing composition. At the center sat Christ, calm, serene, a quiet triangle of stillness. Around him, the disciples stirred in waves of emotion, shock, anger, confusion, disbelief. Each face carried expression, each hand spoke a gesture, each body leaned and turned with living movement. The tables stretched outward, almost inviting the viewer to join the meal. The room behind the figures was painted with perspective so perfect that it seemed to open into space, as if the wall itself dissolved. Light streamed in softly, illuminating Christ's face, casting subtle shadows upon the table. The bread, the wine, the folds of cloth, all were rendered with care, yet never distracted from the human drama unfolding. Leonardo worked slowly, experimenting with technique. Instead of true fresco, he painted upon the dry wall with tempera and oil, seeking richer tones and subtler blending. At the time, it seemed a triumph, the figures glowing with life. Yet the method was fragile, and soon after its completion, the painting began to fade, to flake, to suffer from dampness and age. Still, even as it decayed, its power endured, for those who looked upon it felt the presence of life itself. To the friars, to the duke, to all who saw it, the Last Supper was more than a painting. It was a revelation. Never before had sacred art carried such humanity, such immediacy. The disciples were no longer distant saints, but men caught in a moment of crisis. Christ was no longer a remote figure, but a calm center of stillness within turmoil. Leonardo had turned a wall into a window, a meal into a story into a mirror of human soul. Even as he worked on this masterpiece, Leonardo's notebooks continued to fill. Between sketches of apostles and studies of hands, one might find diagrams of water wheels, designs for flying machines, or experiments with light. To him, painting was not separate from science. The tilt of a head, the gesture of a hand, the play of light across a face, all were grounded in observation, in patient study of the world around him. Milan gave him years of creativity, years in which he balanced art, invention, and service to the court. He painted portraits, among them the lady with an ermine, her gaze quiet yet piercing. He designed fortifications, machines, and spectacles for courtly celebrations. He planned cities, imagined canals, and dreamed of worlds yet unbuilt. And when the city grew still at night, when the castle gates closed and the halls emptied, Leonardo would often remain awake. By lamplight, he returned to his pages, recording what he had seen that day, sketching ideas, refining visions. His hand moved endlessly, guided by curiosity, fueled by wonder. The equestrian statue, grand though it was, would never rise in bronze. The Last Supper, magnificent though it was, would begin to fade. Yet even so, what Leonardo created in Milan was eternal. For though stone and paint may crumble, the vision within them endures. The vision of a man who saw life not as fragments, but as a whole, and who sought to capture its unity with brush, pen, and imagination. In the quiet of the convent's refectory, where friars once ate their simple meals, Leonardo's masterpiece still whispered of betrayal, still glowed with light, still carried the weight of silence after words. And in his heart, Leonardo knew that art, though fragile, had the power to outlast even the strongest of walls. When the night deepened and his tools were laid aside, he would drift into sleep. Perhaps in his dreams he saw the faces of the apostles, gathered again around their table. Perhaps he heard the sound of hooves from the horse that never came to be. Perhaps he envisioned the wings of machines beating against the air, carrying men toward the heavens. Whatever the dreams, they rested gently upon him, as the city of Milan dreamed with him. From the moment Leonardo first gazed at birds gliding above the fields of Vinci, a quiet longing had taken root in him. He had seen how wings caught the air, how feathers shifted and curved, how flight seemed at once effortless and miraculous. In Florence, in Milan, and everywhere his travels carried him, that same fascination remained, as constant as the beat of a wing against the wind. To Leonardo, the ability to fly was not only a marvel of nature, it was a mystery to be studied, a dream to be pursued. He did not see birds as mere creatures of beauty. He saw them as teachers, living models of principles that might one day lift humankind from the ground. And so, as he filled page after page of his notebooks with sketches, he returned again and again to the question of flight. He watched pigeons wheel above city towers, their wings catching the light. He studied hawks circling with slow grace, climbing higher with each turn. He measured the span of wings, the angle of feathers, the curve of beaks. No movement was too small for him to notice. The way a bird landed, balancing with a flick of its tail, became as significant as the way it rose into the sky. His notebooks grew crowded with designs inspired by these observations. He drew wings of wood and cloth, shaped to mimic the feathers of birds. He imagined machines with cranks and pulleys, to be driven by human strength. Some looked like great bats, their wings stretching wide. Others resembled vast kites, meant to catch the currents of air. Each sketch carried a sense of possibility, as if the dream might take form at any moment. One design, often called the ornithopter, showed a contraption with two large wings attached to a wooden frame. The pilot, lying flat, would move arms and legs to drive the wings, imitating the flapping of a bird. Another resembled a parachute, a pyramid of cloth meant to slow descent, allowing a man to drift gently back to earth. Leonardo even sketched a glider, with wings fixed in place, designed to ride the air currents rather than beat against them. He understood that air, though invisible, behaved like a fluid, pressing against wings as water presses against a swimmer's arms. He noted how feathers overlapped, how birds adjusted their wings to control lift and balance. With careful words in his mirrored script, he explained his thoughts. The bird is an instrument working according to mathematical law, and man has the power to reproduce all its movements. Yet, for all his brilliance, Leonardo faced limits. The strength of human muscles was not enough to power great wings, the materials of his time too heavy to rise. His machines, though elegant on paper, remained bound to earth. Some scholars believe he may have built small models, perhaps even tested gliders, but no evidence shows that his contraptions ever truly flew. Still, this did not lessen his devotion. For him, the pursuit was as important as the result. He often wrote of his wish to soar. Once you have tasted flight, he imagined, you will walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward, for there you have been, and there you will long to return. Whether or not these words were his own, they echo the yearning that filled his life. In Milan, between commissions and duties for the Duke, he returned to his bird studies. In Florence, among the busy streets, he still paused to watch doves and swallows. Wherever he travelled, he sought the sky, his gaze always lifted toward the movement of wings. At times, his notebooks carried more than drawings. They carried dreams. Lists of questions filled the margins. How does a bird balance in crosswind? How does it ascend without flapping? Why do large birds rise slowly, while small ones dart swiftly? Each question opened a door, and behind each door lay more mysteries. He considered not only the mechanics of flight, but its meaning. To fly was to transcend, to escape the weight of the world, to join the heavens. Birds, in their freedom, seemed closer to divinity, their effortless arcs across the sky a kind of silent music. For a man who blended art, science, and spirit, this symbolism was not lost. And yet, Leonardo was never content with wonder alone. Always, he sought to test, to measure, to understand. He drew wings folded and wings extended, wings rising and wings falling. He sketched entire pages of feathers, noting their structure, the way each quill supported the whole. He imagined a man suspended in air, turning, gliding, steering by shifting his weight. In his mind's eye, the dream was vivid. On the page, it became detailed. In reality, it remained forever just out of reach. Still, the pursuit itself gave him joy. In the evenings, when his work at court was done, he often lingered by candlelight, his pen scratching across parchment. Outside, the city slept, but within his chamber, wings stretched wide in ink, machines rose toward the heavens, and birds taught lessons silently from the page. Even when sleep claimed him, the dream did not fade. In the quiet of night, he may have seen himself lifted by invisible currents, gliding over rivers and valleys, drifting over mountains, watching the world from above. Perhaps he felt the wind rush past, the weight of the earth fall away, the stars drawing closer with every heartbeat. Though his machines never truly flew, his vision did. Centuries later, men would rise into the sky, carried not by cloth and wood, but by engines and steel. And in their triumph, they would look back to Leonardo, to the man who had dreamed of wings long before flight was possible. For now, in his own time, his dream remained on the page. Yet those pages glowed with life, filled with wings that never tired, machines that never broke, skies that never closed. And as Leonardo closed his eyes each night, the dream carried him aloft, gently, endlessly, into the quiet air of sleep. For Leonardo, the natural world was not a backdrop to human life. It was the very heart of existence. From the smallest leaf to the widest river, from the flow of water to the curve of a shell, everything spoke a language of order, rhythm, and harmony. To see the world was, for him, to study it, to draw it, to question it, and to wonder at it. Among all of nature's wonders, water held his deepest fascination. Since childhood, he had stood by streams and rivers, watching them flow with endless motion. In Milan, in Florence, wherever he travelled, he returned to rivers as a student returns to a master. He observed how currents split and merged, how whirlpools spun with quiet power, how droplets clung together and then fell apart. He noted how water carved stone, how floods swept through valleys, how rain gathered into streams that wound their way back to the sea. In his notebooks, he filled page after page with sketches of waves, spirals, eddies, and floods. He described water as the driving force of all nature, and to him it was both gentle and fierce, able to nourish fields, yet also able to sweep away towns. He compared its patterns to the curls of hair, the rings of trees, the lines of muscles. To Leonardo, water was not only a physical element, but a metaphor for movement itself, for the flow of life through time. He dreamed of harnessing its strength. He designed machines to divert rivers, to irrigate fields, to power mills. He imagined canals that could carry ships across great distances, locks that could raise and lower vessels with ease. He studied floods and wrote plans for controlling them, believing that with patience and design, humans could live in harmony with water's power. His mind carried both reverence for its mystery and ambition to guide its force. Yet water was only one of his teachers. The earth itself drew his curiosity. He collected stones, studied fossils, traced the shapes of cliffs and valleys. He noticed shells embedded in mountains, far from the sea, and wondered how they had come to rest there. He concluded, centuries ahead of his time, that the earth was far older than most believed, shaped by ages of change, uplift, and erosion. In the quiet lines of rocks, he read the long story of the world. Plants, too, captured his patient eye. He sketched leaves in detail, showing how veins spread in branching patterns. He studied how stems bent toward the sun, how roots reached deep into soil, how flowers opened and closed with the hours of the day. He saw in plants not just beauty, but design, systems that followed hidden laws. His pages showed delicate studies of grasses, blossoms, and seeds, each line drawn with the same care he gave to the faces of angels. In the swirl of water, in the growth of plants, in the shaping of stone, Leonardo saw unity. Patterns repeated across scales. Spirals in shells echoed spirals in whirlpools. The branching of trees resembled the branching of veins in the body. The flow of rivers mirrored the flow of blood. Nature, to him, was not chaotic, but ordered, woven together by laws that could be studied, understood, and reflected in art. This belief guided his painting as much as his science. When he painted landscapes, they were not simple backgrounds, but studies of geology, weather, and growth. The mountains in the distance carried the structure of real rock formations. The rivers that wound through valleys flowed as true rivers do. The plants in the foreground showed the precision of botany. Even in portraits, where the focus was a human face, Leonardo placed his subjects against landscapes that seemed alive, breathing with the same spirit as the sitter. One of the clearest examples of this unity can be seen in the Mona Lisa, though it would come later in his life. Behind her, mysterious smiles stretched a landscape of winding rivers and rocky formations, as though the earth itself was part of her expression. For Leonardo, humanity and nature were inseparable, each reflecting the other, each carrying the same hidden laws of balance and form. In his quiet hours, Leonardo often walked into the countryside. He left behind the noise of the city to listen to the rustle of leaves, the trickle of streams, the song of birds. He observed clouds shifting across the sky, watched how sunlight softened as evening drew near. In these moments, he was not a court painter or an engineer. He was simply a man in awe of the world, listening to its endless lessons. At times, he would sit by water, dropping a pebble and watching ripples spread outward, circling again and again until they touched the banks. He thought of how every action carried consequence, how motion carried into stillness, how life itself moved in waves. Such small meditations filled his mind with calm, even as his notebooks filled with diagrams. But Leonardo's genius lay not only in observation, it lay in connection. Where others might see a rock, a tree, or a river as separate, he saw them as reflections of one another. The veins of leaves mirrored the flow of rivers. The movement of water mirrored the flow of blood. The swirl of hair mirrored the curl of waves. In this harmony, he felt that the world revealed itself, quiet yet clear. Evenings often found him returning home with sketches tucked into his notebooks, his clothes perhaps dusted with soil, his mind filled with patterns of stone and leaf. By lamplight, he copied what he had seen, refining it with notes and questions. Outside, the wind might rustle leaves, the river might flow softly, and Leonardo, bending over his desk, traced those same movements onto paper. When sleep came, it carried him back to the natural world he so loved. In his dreams, rivers whispered softly, plants opened their petals in slow silence, stones shifted with the patience of ages. He drifted with water, swayed with branches, flowed with the earth itself. And as the night deepened, the boundaries between man and nature dissolved, leaving only harmony, quiet, and peace. In the year 1500, Leonardo da Vinci returned to Florence, the city where his journey as an artist had truly begun decades before. The familiar streets, the towers, the bells of its churches, and the flow of the Arno River welcomed him back, though he himself had changed. He was no longer the young apprentice in Verrocchio's workshop, eager to prove his skill with paint and brush. He was now a man of nearly 50, carrying with him years of work, notebooks filled with ideas, and a reputation that stretched far beyond the city walls. Florence, however, was not the same either. The city was alive with energy, its people full of ambition, its leaders eager to display power through art and architecture. Competition among artists was fierce, for commissions from the government or wealthy patrons were both lucrative and prestigious. In this environment, Leonardo's return was met with both admiration and expectation. Soon, he was invited to take part in a project that would test his artistry. and his ability to capture movement and story on a grand scale. The government commissioned him to paint a mural in the Hall of 500 in the Palazzo Vecchio, the seat of Florence's political power. The subject was to be a great battle scene, celebrating the city's military victories. For Leonardo, who often avoided scenes of violence, it was a challenging task. Yet he accepted, perhaps seeing it as a chance to show the full power of his imagination. In his notebooks, he began to sketch horses rearing, soldiers struggling, faces contorted with emotion. His attention to detail was, as always, remarkable. He did not simply draw men in armor. He studied the anatomy of horses, the mechanics of muscles straining in combat, the chaos of movement. To him, the scene was not just about triumph, but about the raw energy of life in its most intense form. But Leonardo was not alone in this endeavor. Another commission for the same hall was given to a younger artist, one whose talent and ambition were quickly rising, Michelangelo Buonarroti. The rivalry between them was inevitable. Michelangelo was fiery, intense, and bold, his style marked by muscular figures and dramatic power. Leonardo, by contrast, was subtle, graceful, and deeply invested in observation and detail. The people of Florence watched with anticipation. Two of the greatest artists of their time were now set against each other, each preparing a masterpiece that would adorn the city's most important chamber. Whispers filled the streets. Whose work would shine brighter? Whose vision would triumph? Leonardo began to work on his design, known as the Battle of Anghiari. The central scene he conceived was one of violent struggle. 4 horsemen locked in combat, their animals straining, their weapons clashing, their faces fierce with determination. It was not simply a depiction of battle, but a study of human passion, anger, courage, desperation, expressed in every line and gesture. Yet, as often happened with Leonardo, his perfectionism slowed the process. He experimented with new techniques for painting the mural, hoping to achieve brilliance and durability. Instead of the traditional fresco method, he tried an oil-based approach on a dry wall. At first, the colors shone vividly, rich and deep. But soon, the technique failed. The paint began to drip and run, the figures blurring. The experiment, so full of promise, became a source of disappointment. Michelangelo, meanwhile, prepared his own design, the Battle of Cassina, filled with muscular figures in dramatic poses. Though he did not complete the painting, his sketches impressed many with their power and vigor. The rivalry between the two masters became the talk of Florence, a comparison not only of art but of character. Leonardo, the dreamer and observer; Michelangelo, the fiery genius. For Leonardo, the failed mural was not the end of his work in Florence. His reputation remained strong, and his talents were still in demand. Around this time, he began one of his most enduring projects, the portrait of Lisa Gherardini, the wife of a wealthy Florentine merchant. This painting, though modest in size, would become one of the most famous works of art in history, the Mona Lisa. But that story belonged to the years just ahead. While he worked, Leonardo continued his studies of the natural world, filling notebooks with sketches of rivers, plants, and machines. He also maintained his role as advisor and engineer, offering ideas for bridges, fortifications, and waterworks. His restless mind moved constantly between art and science, between the canvas and the notebook, between vision and invention. At times, he must have walked the streets of Florence with a sense of reflection. Here, he had once been an apprentice, learning the craft of painting under Verrocchio. Now he returned as a master, his name known across Italy. Yet he was still searching, still reaching for something beyond the grasp of any single project. The rivalry with Michelangelo, though often remembered as a clash of giants, was perhaps less important to Leonardo himself than to those who watched from outside. For him, the true rival was always his own imagination, which demanded more than time or materials could provide. His vision was vast, and each project was only a fragment of what he dreamed. In the evenings when work was done, he may have stood on the banks of the Arno once more, watching the water flow as he had in youth. The city lights glimmered, voices echoed from the streets, Yet the river's steady motion reminded him of something eternal. Rivalries faded, commissions came and went, but the flow of water, the curve of nature, and the quiet mysteries of the world remained. And so Leonardo's time in Florence, though marked by unfinished works and competition, was also rich with creation, reflection, and growth. It was a chapter in which he returned to his roots, measured himself against new challenges, and prepared, without knowing it, to create the smile that would outlast centuries. As night fell over the city, Florence grew quiet, its towers dark against the sky. In his workshop, Leonardo set aside his sketches, the day's experiments left unfinished. The sound of the river outside lulled him toward rest, and as his eyes closed, perhaps he saw not battles or rivalries, but the gentle flow of the Arno, carrying him into dreams as endless and fluid as water itself. In the quiet years after his return to Florence, Leonardo began a portrait that, though small in size, would one day become the most recognized and mysterious painting in the world. It was the likeness of Lisa Gherardini, the wife of Florentine merchant Francesco del Giocondo. To her family, she was simply a respected woman of her time. To Leonardo, she became something far more, a subject through which he could express his deepest knowledge of nature, light, and the human spirit. The commission was, on its surface, ordinary. Merchants often hired artists to paint their wives or children, recording their presence in the world with dignity and grace. Yet Leonardo never approached a portrait as a mere likeness. For him, it was an opportunity to capture the living essence of a person, the subtle play of thought and feeling that moved across the face. And so, he began the portrait with the same care he gave to grand works, filling it not only with detail, but with mystery. He studied Lisa with the patience of a scientist and the tenderness of a poet. He observed the corners of her mouth, the gentle curves of her cheeks, the softness of her gaze. He noted how her expression shifted with each breath, never fixed, always alive. To capture this movement, he turned to a technique he had perfected over years, sfumato, the soft blending of tones that erased harsh lines and created a gentle transition from light to shadow. In this way, the smile became something elusive, appearing and disappearing as the eye wandered. Behind Lisa, he painted not a plain background, but a landscape of winding rivers, distant mountains, and bridges fading into mist. These were not exact places, but an imagined world, drawn from his endless studies of geology and water. The twisting roads, the flowing rivers, the shifting horizons suggested both vastness and mystery, as though her presence was bound to the earth itself. Humanity and nature were joined, the sitter and the world behind her sharing a single breath. The portrait was small, yet Leonardo worked on it with tireless devotion. He carried it with him for years, refining it again and again, adding layers of delicate glaze, adjusting shadows, deepening the harmony between figure and landscape. Unlike many commissions, he never delivered it to the family who had requested it. Instead, he kept it with him, as if it belonged not to them, but to himself. To those who saw it, the painting seemed alive. The eyes followed the viewer with quiet presence. The smile shifted with each glance, warm one moment, distant the next. Some described it as joyful, others as melancholic, still others as unreadable. Leonardo had achieved what he always sought, not the copy of a face, but the suggestion of a soul, a portrait that breathed and thought in silence. He may have used musicians to entertain Lisa during the sittings, believing that music could relax the spirit and bring out natural expressions. He may have spoken gently, encouraging her to forget the formality of posing. For Leonardo, the human face was not a mask to be painted, but a mirror of inner life, and he sought to capture that fleeting quality more than any fixed likeness. In the folds of her clothing, in the shadows of her hands, in the faint blush of her cheeks, he layered paint so subtly that no brushstroke was visible. The transitions were so smooth that the painting seemed less a product of paint than of breath itself. Time vanished in its making. Hours, days, years slipped away as Leonardo returned again and again to refine, to adjust, to deepen the mystery. As with all his works, the painting was never finished in his eyes. Perfection was always just beyond reach, and so he carried the Mona Lisa with him into later years, bringing it to France when he entered the service of King Francis III. It would remain by his side until the end of his life, a quiet companion that spoke no words yet carried endless meaning. To us, centuries later, the painting is a masterpiece, surrounded by crowds and guarded with care. But in Leonardo's time, it was simply one work among many, though one he clearly cherished. Perhaps he recognized that in her smile, in her gaze, he had achieved something rare, a portrait not of a moment, but of eternity. When he looked at the Mona Lisa, he may have seen not only Lisa Gherardini, but also the culmination of his studies, the softness of sfumato, the unity of man and nature, the harmony of art and science. It was a mirror of his own mind, filled with curiosity, observation, and quiet wonder. At night, when he set aside his brushes, the image lingered in the dim light of his workshop. The smile glowed softly, the landscape stretched endlessly, the eyes followed silently. And as Leonardo rested, the painting seemed to rest with him, both artist and portrait suspended in the same calm, timeless stillness. In the hush of evening, the Mona Lisa became more than paint on wood. It became a companion to thought, a reflection of mystery, a reminder that beauty need not be loud or grand, but can live in the quiet turn of a smile. It was, in its own way, a lullaby in paint, soft, elusive, and eternal. And so, as sleep overtook him, Leonardo may have carried that smile into his dreams, its shifting presence guiding him gently toward rest, as though the painting itself whispered peace. While the world often remembers Leonardo da Vinci for his paintings, he himself may have felt equally, if not more deeply, defined by his role as an inventor and engineer. For in his notebooks, in the endless sketches of gears, levers, pulleys, and designs, we see a mind ceaselessly at work, imagining possibilities far beyond his century. Art revealed the beauty of the world, but invention promised to shape it, to transform the way people lived, built, traveled, and even waged war. From his earliest years, Leonardo had been drawn to machines. He studied tools used by craftsmen, watched the turning of wheels in mills, observed how levers and gears multiplied force. His notebooks grew crowded with sketches, windmills, pumps, cranes, and devices that seemed to spring from both imagination and observation. What others accepted as ordinary, he saw as a puzzle to be understood, improved, or reinvented. During his time in Milan, Leonardo had offered his services to Ludovico Sforza, the Duke. In his famous letter of application, he had listed not paintings, but machines, bridges, cannons, armored vehicles, fortifications, and designs for war. Only after describing these did he mention his abilities as a painter and sculptor. To Leonardo, invention was not a lesser skill. It was central, a way to combine his knowledge of physics, mathematics, and nature into forms of use. Among his designs was a machine that looked like an early tank, an armored car, round in shape, fitted with cannons all around its perimeter. The operator inside could turn cranks to move the wheels, while the sloping armor deflected attacks. On paper, it seemed formidable, a weapon centuries ahead of its time. In practice, the design had flaws, and some historians even suggest Leonardo may have intentionally drawn the gears incorrectly, as though wary of giving too much destructive power to any ruler. He also drew bridges of many kinds. Some were massive, meant to span wide rivers with strength and elegance. Others were portable, designed to be carried by soldiers, quickly assembled, and just as quickly removed. One design for a swinging bridge showed how it could pivot upward, allowing ships to pass or blocking the way of an advancing army. Bridges, for Leonardo, were not only practical structures, but expressions of balance, beauty, and ingenuity. Siege machines filled his notebooks as well, giant crossbows large enough to hurl stones, catapults that twisted with tension, towers on wheels meant to breach walls. He studied how to angle cannons for maximum effect, how to protect soldiers with covered wagons, how to fortify cities with star-shaped walls that deflected artillery fire. His mind moved between offense and defense, destruction and protection, invention, and restraint. Yet Leonardo was not only a designer of war. Many of his machines were peaceful, intended to improve life. He sketched water pumps for irrigation, mills for grinding grain, devices for raising heavy stones in construction. He imagined a mechanical knight, capable of standing, sitting, and moving its arms, a marvel of gears and pulleys. He even envisioned machines for entertainment, musical instruments powered by air and motion, automated devices that delighted as much as they astonished. Some of his ideas were whimsical, like a machine for stretching dough into pasta, or a device for polishing mirrors. Others seemed like dreams of the distant future: helicopters, submarines, even an early form of the bicycle. Many could not be built with the materials of his time, yet each reflected his restless curiosity, his refusal to accept limits. For Leonardo, invention was not only about utility, but about understanding. When he drew a machine, he was also studying the laws of motion, the way force moved through levers and gears, the relationship between energy and work. Each device became both a solution and an experiment, a way of asking questions through design. In his notebooks, machines often stood side by side with drawings of anatomy, plants, and rivers. To him, they were connected. The turning of gears echoed the joints of the body. The flow of water mirrored the flow of force through a wheel. The spiral of a screw resembled the spiral of shells and seeds. Just as in nature, he saw harmony in mechanics, laws that repeated in different forms across the world. Few of his inventions were built in his lifetime. Some were too ambitious, some too costly, others simply beyond the materials and technology of the 15th century. Yet the value lay not only in their construction, but in their vision. Centuries later, engineers and scientists would look back and marvel at how closely his ideas anticipated the machines of modern life. At times, he must have sat alone by candlelight, his pen scratching on paper, gears turning in his mind. The workshop around him quieted, the city outside dimmed, but within, machines came alive, wheels spinning, bridges rising, cannons firing, wings beating. His imagination knew no rest, even as the world around him slept. But even in invention, Leonardo sought beauty. His machines were not rough sketches of utility. They were drawn with elegance, each line graceful, each form harmonious. The curve of a wheel, the arch of a bridge, the symmetry of a gear, all reflected the same sense of balance he gave to the folds of drapery in a painting. For him, there was no separation between art and engineering. Both were expressions of the same truth. In the end, many of his designs remained only dreams, but dreams with weight, with form, with presence. They filled his notebooks like silent companions, waiting for a future that might one day bring them to life. And as Leonardo laid his head down at night, after long hours of sketching, perhaps he imagined himself walking among those machines. He might have seen bridges unfolding like the wings of great birds, cannons standing silent in rows, gears turning in endless rhythm. Yet in his dream, they made no sound of war. Instead, they turned gently, steadily, like the flow of water, like the beating of a heart, like the quiet passage of time itself. By the second decade of the 16th century, Leonardo da Vinci had grown older. His beard, once dark, had turned silver, flowing long and soft over his chest. His hands, which had drawn countless lines and brushed layers of paint onto panels, had grown slower, though his mind remained as restless as ever. He had spent years in Milan, in Florence, and in service to dukes and patrons. Now, his journey brought him to Rome, the heart of Christendom, where popes reigned and where art and science flourished side by side. In 1513, Leonardo entered Rome under the protection of Giuliano de' Medici, the brother of Pope Leo X. He was given a place to live in the Belvedere Palace, close to the Vatican, where Raphael and Michelangelo were at work on grand commissions. The city was alive with energy, its walls echoing with ambition, its churches rising toward the heavens. To many, it was the center of the world. For Leonardo, Rome offered new opportunities, but also new challenges. He was in his 60s, and while his reputation remained unmatched, the competition was fierce. Michelangelo, younger and fiery, was completing the Sistine Chapel ceiling, a work of immense scale and drama. Raphael, graceful and elegant, was painting his celebrated frescoes in the papal apartments. Their works dazzled Rome, filling the city with praise and admiration. Leonardo, by contrast, received few major painting commissions during his time there. His slowness, his perfectionism, and his constant shifting of interest from art to science to engineering made him less suited for patrons eager for quick results. Still, he immersed himself in studies that fascinated him: anatomy, mechanics, the flow of water, the properties of light. In Rome, he continued his dissections of the human body, studying muscles, nerves, and the workings of the heart. His drawings of anatomy, precise and delicate, revealed details no one had captured before. He sketched the chambers of the heart, the valves, the way blood flowed in spirals. He studied the brain, the structure of bones, the branching of veins and arteries. To him, the body was not only flesh, but a machine of wonder, a system of harmony as intricate as any invention. He also continued his experiments with optics, exploring how light entered the eye, how vision worked, how perspective shaped what we see. His notebooks from this period show mirrors, prisms, and diagrams of the paths of rays. Just as he had once studied the flight of birds and the movement of water, now he sought to understand the mystery of sight itself. Yet despite his endless curiosity, Leonardo sometimes felt frustration in Rome. Commissions slipped from his grasp, often going instead to Raphael or Michelangelo. His experiments with alchemy and materials drew suspicion. At times, he seemed like a man out of step with the pace of the city, more absorbed in quiet questions than in grand displays. Still, his notebooks grew ever richer, his imagination never still. He designed plans for draining marshes, machines for grinding lenses, studies for hydraulic systems. He sketched fantastic machines powered by water or air, envisioned cities with orderly streets and sanitation systems, dreamed of improvements that might lift society toward greater comfort and health. Though Rome was vibrant, Leonardo himself often withdrew from its noise. He preferred quiet moments in gardens or in his workshop, surrounded by papers and models. Age brought him not less curiosity, but perhaps a deeper reflection. He knew that time was limited, that many of his projects would never be completed, yet he seemed content to pursue them all the same, for the pursuit itself was joy. As years passed, his health began to weaken. His right hand grew stiff, possibly from a stroke, making painting more difficult. He continued to write and draw with his left, filling pages with thoughts and designs. The great works he had once begun remained unfinished, and though patrons sometimes pressed him, he seemed at peace with leaving them as fragments of a greater vision. For Leonardo, no single work could contain the breadth of his mind. By 1516, his time in Rome was drawing to a close. A new invitation arrived, this time from across the mountains, in France. King Francis I, a young monarch who admired Leonardo deeply, invited him to his court, offering him a home, respect, and freedom to continue his work. For a man now in his 60s, weary from rivalries and the demands of patrons, the offer must have seemed like a final haven. And so Leonardo prepared to leave Italy, the land of his birth and his life's work. He had walked its streets, painted its altarpieces, designed its bridges, studied its rivers, and dissected its mysteries. Now in his final years he would cross into another country, carrying with him his notebooks, his memories, and 3 paintings he cherished most: the Mona Lisa, the St. John the Baptist, and the Virgin and Child with St. Anne. As he departed Rome, perhaps he looked back one last time at the city's towers, the dome of its churches, the gardens where he had walked. The noise of Michelangelo's hammer and Raphael's brush faded behind him. Ahead lay France, and the quiet companionship of a king who valued him not only for his works, but for his wisdom. At night, on the road north, Leonardo must have rested in simple inns, his body tired but his mind still alive with ideas. The sound of distant water, the rustle of trees, the flicker of candlelight accompanied his thoughts. He was no longer a young man racing toward ambition, but an elder moving steadily, gently, into the twilight of his years. And in that twilight, his imagination remained as bright as ever. Even as sleep overtook him, he dreamed of rivers, machines, faces, and skies, dreams that had carried him all his life, and that now guided him toward his final chapter. In 1516, after decades of wandering between cities, dukes, and patrons, Leonardo da Vinci left Italy behind and crossed into France. He was 64 years old, a man whose name was already legendary across Europe. With him, he carried his notebooks, some filled to the margins with designs and sketches, as well as 3 paintings he held close: the mysterious Mona Lisa, the gentle Virgin and Child with Saint Anne, and the enigmatic Saint John the Baptist. These he would guard until his last days, as if they were pieces of himself. The journey northward was long, but it was softened by the promise of a new home. King Francis V of France, still young and full of energy, admired Leonardo deeply. To him, Leonardo was not merely an artist but a sage, a living treasure whose presence would bring honor to his court. Where others had pressed him for quick commissions, Francis offered him freedom, comfort, and respect. For a man who had often felt constrained by impatient patrons, this invitation must have felt like a gift. Leonardo settled at Clos-Lucé, a manor house near the great chateau of Amboise in the Loire Valley. There, connected to the royal palace by an underground passage, he was given rooms, gardens, and servants. He lived as a guest of honor, surrounded by the gentle countryside of France, where vineyards stretched across rolling hills, and the river Loire moved steadily under the changing skies. Francis I often visited him, speaking with him not only about art, but about philosophy, science, and invention. The young king valued Leonardo as a thinker, a man whose wisdom extended far beyond painting. Their conversations may have ranged across the cosmos, about the movements of planets, the mysteries of water, the nature of the human soul. To Francis, Leonardo was less a court artist than a companion, a mind to inspire his reign. Though age weighed on him, Leonardo continued to work. His right hand had grown stiff, limiting his ability to paint, but he wrote with his left, filling pages with reflections and diagrams. He arranged and reordered his notes, perhaps with the hope of leaving them in some form of order for the future. His mind turned often to grand projects: a treatise on painting, studies of anatomy, designs for ideal cities. Much remained unfinished, but he pressed on, knowing that no life could contain the entirety of his vision. At Clos-Lucé, he also displayed models of his inventions: machines for lifting water, designs for fortifications, and sketches of bridges and flying devices. Francis and his court marveled at them, even if they remained only drawings. For Leonardo, the joy was not only in building, but in imagining, in pushing the boundaries of what might be possible. The gardens of Clos-Lucé became his quiet refuge. There he could walk among trees and flowers, listening to birds and the flowing of streams. Nature had always been his teacher, his endless source of inspiration. And in these last years, he returned to it often, not with the urgency of youth, but with the calm of age. He studied the flight of birds once more, the patterns of leaves, the spirals of shells. In every detail of the natural world, he continued to find wonder. Yet as he grew older, he also became more reflective. He had lived through wars and plagues, through the rise and fall of patrons and cities. He had seen his works admired and abandoned, completed and left unfinished. He had dreamed of machines that could not yet be built, of knowledge that would take centuries to unfold. In the quiet of Clos-Lucé, perhaps he thought about what it all meant, about the balance between ambition and time, between vision and reality. Some evenings, he may have sat by the window, the Loire Valley bathed in golden light, and felt at peace. The king treated him with affection, calling him "my father." Visitors respected him, eager to hear his thoughts. His household was comfortable, his gardens serene. Though his body weakened, his mind remained luminous, like a lamp burning steadily in the twilight. As death drew nearer, Leonardo set his affairs in order. He dictated his will, leaving his notebooks, tools, and works to his devoted pupil and companion, Francesco Melzi. To Salai, his longtime assistant, he left smaller possessions, though their relationship had been complicated. He remembered his servants, his friends, and even those who had cared for him in daily life. Nothing was left unattended, for Leonardo, even in death, sought harmony. On May 1519, at the age of 67, Leonardo da Vinci died at Clos-Lucé. Some accounts say that King Francis was at his side, holding him in his arms, though this may be more legend than fact. What is certain is that his passing marked the end of a life unlike any other. He was buried in the chapel of Saint-Florentin at Amboise, though the tomb was later lost. And yet, in a sense, Leonardo never truly left. His notebooks remained, filled with visions centuries ahead of their time. His paintings continued to inspire awe, their mysteries undimmed by age. His reputation as a genius, as a man of universal curiosity, only grew with the centuries. For those final years in France, Leonardo lived not as a servant to patrons, but as a sage, valued for who he was, rather than only for what he produced. It was a fitting conclusion to a life spent in pursuit of knowledge, beauty, and truth. And as night fell over the Loire Valley over the gardens of Clos-Lucé, perhaps the air carried the faint echo of his dreams, the flutter of wings, the turning of gears, the flowing of water, the quiet hum of a mind that never ceased to wonder. When Leonardo da Vinci passed away in May of 1519, the world did not immediately understand the full magnitude of what it had lost. His death was noted in France, remembered by his companions and his beloved pupil Francesco Melzi, who carefully preserved his papers. Yet in the years that followed, many of his notebooks remained scattered, many of his designs unbuilt, and many of his paintings unfinished. To those around him, he had been extraordinary, yes, but the true breadth of his genius would only unfold with time. For centuries, Leonardo's works lay partly hidden. His few surviving paintings travelled through the courts of Europe, admired by nobles and scholars. The Mona Lisa found its way into the French royal collection, eventually hanging in the Louvre, where her enigmatic smile would one day become the most famous in the world. The Last Supper, fragile even in his lifetime, faded with the years, yet pilgrims continued to visit it, tracing with their eyes the gestures of Christ and the apostles. His other works, scattered and sometimes misattributed, slowly revealed their brilliance to those who sought them. But it was in his notebooks that his true spirit lingered most vividly. Page after page, line after line, Leonardo's mind lived on. Gears and levers, plants and rivers, muscles and bones, faces and storms, all flowed together in a handwriting slanted from right to left, mirrored as though written for himself alone. Melzi, faithful to his master, guarded these papers, though after his own death, many were dispersed, sold, or neglected. Some ended up in collections across Europe, in libraries, in archives, in private hands. Only centuries later would scholars begin to piece them back together, realizing the scale of what Leonardo had left behind. In those pages, the world glimpsed a man centuries ahead of his time. His sketches of flying machines anticipated the helicopter. His studies of the heart predicted modern discoveries about blood flow. His designs for bridges, canals, and fortifications reflected principles still used in engineering. Yet for all their foresight, his notebooks also revealed a man deeply human, curious, playful, restless, forever asking questions. The Renaissance, which had nurtured him, moved on. New artists rose, new inventions spread, new philosophies took hold. But Leonardo's name never disappeared. He was remembered not only as a painter, but as a universal genius, a man whose talents seemed limitless. To later generations, he embodied the very spirit of the Renaissance, the belief that human curiosity and creativity could encompass all things. In the centuries that followed, his reputation grew steadily. Enlightenment thinkers admired his scientific spirit. Romantic writers praised his mystery and imagination. Engineers rediscovered his machines. Physicians marveled at his anatomy. Each era saw in Leonardo a reflection of its own values, drawing from him inspiration for art, science, and philosophy alike. By the 19th century, interest in Leonardo surged once again. Biographers told his story, museums displayed his works, and artists studied his sketches. The modern age, with its fascination for both technology and beauty, found in him a figure who bridged the two. He was both dreamer and doer, artist and scientist, a man who refused to be confined by categories. And so his image grew. The silver-bearded sage, eyes full of thought, a figure who seemed almost timeless. His name entered common speech as a symbol of genius itself. The Renaissance man became a phrase, and at its heart stood Leonardo da Vinci. Today, more than 500 years after his death, Leonardo's presence remains vivid. Millions visit the Louvre each year to stand before the Mona Lisa, drawn by her quiet smile. Visitors in Milan still gaze at the faded Last Supper, imagining what it must have been like in its first brilliance. Scholars pore over his notebooks, decoding his mirrored script, studying his designs. Children learn his name in school, inspired by the thought of a man who could paint, invent, study, and dream all at once. And yet beyond fame, beyond legend, there is something gentle in his memory. For all his vast knowledge, Leonardo was also a man who loved the curve of a leaf, the shimmer of water, the way light touched a face. His greatness lay not only in ambition, but in attention, the patient, tender attention to the world around him. If one were to walk today through the gardens of Clos, where he spent his final years, one might still imagine him strolling slowly, notebook in hand, pausing to observe a bird in flight or the ripple of a stream. The air there carries a quietness, a sense of reflection, as though his spirit lingers in every corner. His legacy is not only in what he created, but in how he lived, with curiosity unending, with wonder undimmed, with the courage to cross boundaries between disciplines. He reminds us that knowledge and beauty, science and art, reason and imagination, are not separate, but intertwined. As the centuries have passed, his memory has become a beacon. To artists, he shows the value of patience and depth. To scientists, he shows the power of observation. To dreamers, he shows that even the most impossible visions can plant seeds for the future. And so, as night falls and the world grows still, Leonardo's story continues to soothe and inspire. His life, stretching from a small Tuscan village to the courts of kings, from the pages of notebooks to the vaults of museums, is a testament to the vastness of human potential. Imagine him now, in some eternal quiet, his silver beard flowing, his eyes still bright. Around him, pages turn softly, filled with sketches of wings and rivers, faces and machines. The air is gentle, the light is calm. His hand rests, but his mind drifts peacefully, as though still dreaming. And in those dreams, he is timeless, not bound by years, not limited by tasks unfinished. He is a painter, an inventor, a student of nature, a lover of beauty. He is Leonardo da Vinci, and his legacy is the enduring wonder of what it means to be human. Thank you for listening to Sleepy Stories tonight. I hope this tale has brought you comfort, calm, and a step closer to rest. If you enjoyed this story, you'll find many more gentle journeys into the lives of remarkable figures from history, each told softly, to ease your mind and help you drift off. You can explore the full playlist of Sleepy Stories whenever you'd like, or simply let the next video play, and I'll guide you through another soothing chapter of the past. Until then, may your night be peaceful, your dreams gentle, and your sleep deep. Good night.